What is up?
My neighbor's cutting down trees. At least it's
Nice,
11
nice.
o'clock right now. He started yesterday at 7 in the morning. So,
That's brutal.
yeah. To be fair, this guy also tried to burn down our neighborhood when he started a trash burn in his backyard that got out of control.
Oh, fun.
So that was fun. And he also shot toward the houses when he was trying to kill some coyote. So,
So we shot at the houses trying to,
well, towards
well, in
towards
that
the
in the
house,
general
in the general
direction.
direction of houses. So I'm like, you know. Sawing down trees with his chainsaw at 7 in the morning is probably the most acceptable of the things he typically does. So
You sound like you have some fun neighbors.
most of them are amazing. This one is a little challenging.
Nice, nice.
So yeah, but most of them are good. In fact, I tweeted to someone. I said, okay, you have three options. Is it the guy that always clears my walks when it snows, the other guy that brings me Hawaiian food, or the guy that tried to burn down the neighborhood? Which guy is sawing trees at 7 in the morning?
I'm saying the guy with the Hawaiian food.
Yeah,
Just to be sarcastic.
yeah. So anyway, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Good.
It's been gorgeous here. So the last 2 days, I've been working from the patio, which
Oh,
is
nice.
nice.
Yeah, it's nice.
So I've been able to sit outside, get some sun, and I mean that makes all the difference. I mean, I know, I definitely deal with seasonal. Is it disaffective or dyspective or they that middle word there. But
Seasonal, some kind of mood disorder.
yeah, I know I
Yeah.
deal with that, in the winter. Just like the lack of sunlight and all of that, and just being stuck in the house. So just something as simple as turning on the sprinkler and sitting on the
Mm.
patio with my laptop doing work, it makes all the difference.
There is something soothing to that sprinkler sound.
It's white noise.
Yeah,
It's nice white noise that kind of really makes you think of the summer. So
yeah.
it's like 80 some degrees out, not a cloud in the sky.
Well, it's
Oh yeah,
nice.
it's nice.
We got some nice blue skies here. It is currently 72. I have 75. So that's nice.
hmm Yeah.
So,
So I'm that jerk remote worker everybody or a lot of people are bitching about right now that, I can't be getting work done sitting on the
yeah,
patio with my laptop.
it just sucks. These remote workers and their
hmm
high maintenance-ness. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I probably not our topic of the day, but we're seeing we're seeing the momentum of some kind of return to normalcy and people
hmm
going back to the office, and lots of conversations happening around remote, um, and lots of interesting conversations happening where people are blaming a lot of dysfunctional business practices on remote. It just seems like such an easy scapegoat for so many things. And it's so frustrating to me. But I mean, this is one of them, right? It's like, well, we can't trust our employees to work remote. They're going to be sitting out on the patio, dinking off all day. But it infuriates me to no end. We saw it at the beginning of the pandemic where people were saying, well, we can't, people are going to work from home. What are they going to be doing? Dishes and laundry and, sitting outside and going for walks. We can't have that. It's going to cost us productivity. And now that we're talking about going back into the office, I hear people complaining about, oh, remote work sucks. There's so many meetings because we have to have meetings to communicate. And I'm like, you guys, you're missing the fundamental problem is not remote work. Absolutely, remote work has amplified it, has made it more visible, but these are fundamental problems with how businesses operate.
hmm
And by deflecting the blame to this as a remote work problem is failing to address the actual problem, and that is that the way that we've historically worked is absolutely broken.
Yeah.
So we're
I
going to
mean,
say, well, we're going to go back in the office and everything's going to be fixed.
yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I believe it is human nature to want to address, excuse me, the symptoms of a problem versus actually getting to the root of the problem. Because getting to the root is very, very hard. Whereas if there's symptoms of it and oh, it's got to be this one thing, and it's not really the root cause of it. And I mean, I'm oversimplifying because I just can't find the exact words I want to use here, and I know that. But really, I mean, I think that's when it comes down to, because I've been watching the whole remote debate blow up again. We're back at it again, and
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, for me as a person, I'm a, whatever floats your boat, dude. As
Yep.
long as you're not hurting anybody, as long as you leave other people alone, do what you want to do,
Yeah.
right? Or do what works for you. So there's those people that I need to go back into the office. Hey, that's great. There's those that, hey, I am more productive from being remote, and I've got the receipts to prove it. That's great. But it's almost like people are looking for a fight right now. That's what I see. Like,
Mhm.
that's the tone I see right now, on various social media outlets around remote work. It's to
Mhm.
pick a fight. And because you have, you know, honestly, both sides are very, very dogmatic.
Mhm.
Um, it's the office is the only way this can be done. All collaboration can only be done in person. Now, granted, it's great to have meetups. It's great to see everybody in person every once in a while, but collaboration could be done in many different ways.
Absolutely. I mean, we've proven it. Lots of other companies have proven it. But again, I think, um, I think a big part of it is people just don't want. Well, maybe it's two things. One, they don't want to admit that something is broken. And two, I think we're just comfortable with the status quo. We're with the way things are. We don't want to rock the boat. Yeah, it's broken, but it's our broken. We love
Mm-hmm.
it that way. And I think that's a big part of a lot of the fights. And I agree from the like extremism. I get turned off as much from the.
That was funny watching the dog come in, run in. That's funny.
I thought she was going to
Oh,
attack.
I'm clipping that part.
um, I lost my train of thought. So I get turned off as much from the blame everything on work from home people as I do on the hardcore remote work people. They
Mm-hmm.
both irritate me to no end. In fact, there's a couple guys on Twitter that I ended up blocking that are like pro remote work guys because they're like they're too extreme. They're too fundamentalism. Like they're just they think that this is the one and only way, and if you don't do it this exact way, you're doing it wrong. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Sorry, I had to laugh at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like with anything, when there's two polarizing, two polarizing sides to it, people default to just what they've been doing. So both sides lose the argument when it's hardcore,
Yeah, we don't
one
come
way
up
or the
with
other.
anything. We don't come up with anything workable because it's much more complicated than to say every problem is solved by being in the office or every problem is solved by being remote. Like it's way more complicated than that. And
Hmm.
and if you're not willing and open to talking about, well, what are the good things that happen in the office and what are the good things that happen remotely, then we're not going to come up with a scenario that works for most people, and that's
Hmm.
that's frustrating to me.
Yeah. Um, So where I was looking to use the remote work piece to pivot to our topic today, because I think working remotely, the topic today plays into that, the ability to actually do it. Because if we look at remote work, there is a certain set of skills you need. There is experience and discipline that you need to work remote successfully. Because I've been telling you for years, every time I tell people that I work from home 100%, and at this point have been doing it 7.5 years, people are like, oh man, I couldn't do that because I get distracted by this and I get distracted by that. The dishes in the sink would bug me. The pile of laundry would bug me. um so it Sorry. Um, but like those things would bug me and I wouldn't actually get any work done. I'd be doing chores around the house all day. And honestly, that is a fair argument. Like, it's one thing, like, I am as guilty as anybody else. I will throw a load of laundry in, at lunchtime during the day. I'll do those little things at points throughout the day, but it
Yeah.
doesn't become the only thing I do, because I believe, like, I've developed the discipline to be able to, like, okay, I'm actually going to take a break from work and clear my head, and by doing that, I'm going to fold the laundry. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'll go empty the dishwasher. Those cliche things the anti work from home people
Yeah.
always bring up. So just throwing somebody in, and especially if I immediately come to, what comes to mind are, people fresh out of college, new to, full-time professional workforce. They, being thrown into that, they will struggle. And I'm
Yeah.
trying not to
Yeah,
jump
for
too
sure.
far ahead.
No, no,
So
no.
really, I've kind of haven't really, I've touched on it. I've tried to intro it in a very, very meandering way, but the topic for today, and it's actually a series I want to start. We've touched on this over the last 3 years since we started podcasting. We've touched on this in different ways. We've had, it's come up during episodes. We've had a couple episodes around it, but I really want to formalize and kick off a series about it, about career experience. So today I want to kick it off with talking about experience within our industry, analytics specifically. We've talked about, you and I have talked about how we've gotten to where we are. We took two totally different paths, and we've talked about before how our industry doesn't have a set education and career path, like being a doctor, being a teacher, being a lawyer. Those careers have a proven path, or not, I don't want to say proven, but they have a determined path. That's the word to use. A determined path to get, you go to one of these types of schools, you go for this long, you take, if you're a doctor, you take a residency at some point. As a teacher during your college years, you're going to do student teaching. Ours is very, very different. And that's the one thing I love about our industry. You have people from all different kinds of backgrounds that have all been drawn to this type of work. Um, so how how do people gain experience? Because now, especially with the growing trend toward remote, that move being accelerated,
Yeah.
how do people get experience? And by the way, I do want to caveat this is I'm trying to get a hold of our friend Stephen Marshall at East Tennessee State University. I want to have him on as part of this series, to talk about what he's doing, again, like some of the updates to his program with the school and what they're doing. I feel he's got a phenomenal program on
Yeah.
getting the students he works with real world experience. Because you think about it, last episode we touched on internships. Sometimes internships really teach you what the career is about. Sometimes you're just extra labor. Sometimes it teaches you things you didn't realize or were expecting to be taught.
Right.
But and sometimes you don't get the real world experience with it. He makes sure you do. So I do want to caveat that. I am definitely working to get him back on the show to talk about that. So that is a very long, meandering introduction to the topic, and it's very, very broad. But without, since we've touched on it before, I don't want to necessarily go into our pasts where we've been. People can go back and look up those episodes. In fact, I know there's one very, very early on we did with John about like how we got here. So I'm going to link that one up in the show notes. So I don't want to revisit that. But with our industry in particular, when people were to come to you and say, how can I get experience doing this? How can I break into this space? What are some things that immediately come to mind for you?
Yeah, and we're and quick side note, people should subscribe to our YouTube channel so they can watch the behind the scenes of the creating of the podcast and watch me eat lunch. So just a shout out to subscribe to the YouTube channel there. Yeah, so we're talking about, students breaking in, but really I think as we talk about this, it's people breaking into the industry. Because I've talked with lots of people that have said, that maybe 2 or 3 jobs deep into their career saying, I want to get into analytics. I have no idea how to get experience so I can get into analytics. So, while I think it makes sense to talk about it from a student perspective, I believe a lot of what we will talk about is beneficial for people of any stage of their career looking to break in. But it is the fundamental challenge with I can't get a job because I don't have experience, but I can't get experience because I can't get the job. It's that constant conundrum, and university is challenging from that aspect. And yeah, I mean, I think having Steven back on, first of all, I think people love hearing from him, but secondarily, I believe he'd give some really valuable insight into this, in that it's challenging at the university level to teach a trade. Oftentimes, I think, in that a lot of what you end up learning often becomes outdated. Think about going into a 4-year program and studying something your freshman year. 4 years in technology is a lifetime. Like, think of how much has changed in just 4 years. So a lot of the technology you may have learned 4 years ago when you started school to when you're graduating now could be completely different. And so I think there are some very real challenges with teaching specific technologies, balanced out with teaching frameworks and things that, regardless of the technology or name brand, that you can apply, with balancing out with that name brand recognition of, well, I can't get a job because I don't have experience with Google Analytics coming out of college. So how do I get it? It's tough. It's challenging. But I think what we've seen at East Tennessee State is, I think a program that can be replicated, in that not only is it giving students hands-on real-world experience with specific technologies and software, which is important. What's more important is they're giving students exposure to real-world problems. And to me, that is what is the most valuable piece of learning experience. And if, as a employer looking to bring on a potential employee, that to me is going to probably come across much more than, oh, I learned about Adobe Analytics, or I learned about Google Analytics in my training.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was thinking back to my college experience, and the more I thought about, like, a lot of the classes I had, a lot of it just taught theory, or taught um or taught this is the way it should be. It teaches hypotheticals. And that was one of the first things when I well, actually, I had started working a job which turned into my first full-time job. I started working that before I actually even started my senior year. So as I'm doing some of my senior year work, and I remember a couple professors up there talking about, well, this is the way it's going to work. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm really starting to doubt some of this stuff, because I am actually at this point in the real world, and things don't always go down this way, or they don't always fit this perfect model. So you need to be able to adjust. And yeah, like that's one of the things, looking back at the program
Yeah.
that I had, there wasn't a lot of real world application in the program that I had. It was a lot more theory and hypotheticals, and this is the way it should be.
Yeah. I think that's the hardest part about it. Is, again, you can teach the hands-on pieces, but you have to be really, really careful to not teach something just hands-on that may be completely outdated. Um, there has to be a balance of a framework and a theory with actual real-world application. And in my opinion, that's where higher ed right now is struggling the most. Unless you mentioned a few professions where I think it makes sense: law, health. It makes sense how those programs are structured, but business and other things that are technology related, that are so incredibly fluid, it's challenging. And both sides of that extreme. We started off this conversation talking about people taking up camps on both sides of the extreme of the work from home debate.
Hmm.
If we look at both sides of the extreme of higher education, on the one hand, if you go too trade oriented, where it's really you're teaching the tools, you run a very real risk that those tools will be outdated. And the student is not going to know how to transition that knowledge from tool A that was taught to tool B, which is now being used. It's a real
Hmm.
problem. On the other extreme, and we see this all the time, if all you do is teach theory, you get students coming out that are very theoretically sound and driven, that are unable to apply their learnings to the real world because the
Yes.
real world is messy and it never works that way. So while that theory may work perfectly in a controlled environment in a sterile lab, it's not going to work in the real world unless you have the ability to be flexible and creative in coming off of the extreme ideals of the theory.
Hmm. Yeah, and thinking back, like there were several classes that immediately come to mind where that was the cognitive dissonance I had after I graduated, after I got out into the field full time. And so I was working in technology implementation, but just in a different space when I first got out of college. And the the disconnect was is even though I kind of started to recognize it through my senior year, getting into it full time, I realized like there's but college always said no, it should be this way, it should be this way, and you're finding out that it isn't always that way. So yeah, like you definitely need a level of that, but also you know uh, finding ways to show that like it always doesn't go this way. And by the way, I do want
It
to
never
say,
goes that way.
yeah, one of the best classes I had in college that I think back to was called Intro to Logic. It was an elective. And one of the best things is it taught me how to think. It taught me how to construct an argument and all as well as deconstruct an argument. You know, how to argue for something. Um and how to debate. And it was a great course.
I knew we were going to be friends forever. My one of my favorite courses was Intro to Logic. It was in the philosophy department. It was one of the required electives for my information systems management
Mhm.
degree. Um, and I loved the class so much that I took after that inductive logic. After that, I took deductive logic, and after that I took four more philosophy and logic classes because they were so incredibly interesting. I think I ended up graduating with like 28 more humanities credits than I needed to graduate. But yeah, I just love those classes, and I mean that type of thing is something that can be applied, right? Like those are the types of classes and frameworks that's not going to change in 4 years,
Mhm.
right? That is a structure that you can use and have as an extremely valuable piece. Sorry, of what you do. As far as the more challenging pieces, the kind of the technical components, whether we're talking about analytics or development or design, that's more challenging. And one of my favorite classes actually forced real world experience on me. So I took a class in software design. The software we were using was Microsoft Visual Basic, which was a pretty approachable language to create both the front end and back end code. And our project was the professor had gone out into the community and found a handful of local businesses that had a
Mhm.
problem that needed to be solved, and then assigned us to a business and said, go meet with them, do requirements gathering, design your solution, and then build a prototype for them in the space of the semester. I probably learned more from that class than any other class about just the art of building software. because it was that, sure, we had all of that theory, and you know, here's how to write little programs to do X and Y, um, but none of it was applied to the real world. They had real problems. They had real users that you had to work with, and stakeholders that changed their minds, and real issues you ran into. So for me, I was assigned to the local trade school, and for one of their classes, they wanted students to clock in and out. And so they had a little laptop, and I wrote a pretty simple Visual Basic program that had a backend database behind it that allowed the students, it was basically a time clock that allowed the students to come in and enter their student ID. It would clock them in. They would come, they would leave, they would enter their student ID, and it would clock them out, and it'd create a bunch of reports. And I was pretty proud of it. It was super cool. And it gave me a ton of real world experience, and it gave me a ton of confidence, honestly, in doing that. So I would say, as students, or you know, someone at the university level, I would look for those types of classes, and they're probably going to be fairly rare, where you have a mix of theory and teaching the fundamentals with somehow blending it with a real world experience. If you can't find that, there is nothing saying that you should not go and look for that on your own. And that's what I did my senior year of college. That's what I did. Is I went and found a job that I thought would give me the opportunity to apply a lot of the technology that I was learning on the job. And so I got a job at a collections agency. My job was doing data entry. All of that was boring. But what it did is it gave me access to a lot of data and a lot of data input. And I spent a lot of my time not doing data entry. I would get my work done fast. I typed at that time like 132 words a minute. So I could do a lot of data entry really quickly. And I would spend the rest of my time thinking about, there's got to be a better way to do this. Can I build a system? Can I write some software? Can I do something to make this more efficient? And so while it wasn't what I was hired to do, the job gave me the opportunity to do that. And so I've kind of shared that story with lots of students, but not even students, people that are already working. I've shared this same kind of philosophy is, you know, they come to me with the same question. I want to get into analytics, but I can't get a job in analytics because I don't have experience. I'm like, I guarantee you that you're working right now in a job where there's data available, where either input or output are stored somewhere that you can access as part of your job, and you can start being an analyst. You can start thinking about data right now. I guarantee it. And so rather than waiting for the perfect opportunity or the perfect internship or the perfect, create it, make it happen. You have the ability to do that. So whether that's you're at school and you're trying to find the right class, or trying to find a job that, while it may not be the description of what you want, just getting the job to give you the opportunity, or you already have a job and using that as the foundation to say, okay, what's around me and how can I start using that to expand what my role is, to start involving some analysis related components.
Mm-hmm. And you just said a lot there. And I'll sum up each of them, that I think all comes around to core skills needed to work in analytics. So the first thing I noted down was when we were talking about like the courses in college around logic and humanities and stuff like that, you know, the skills, the soft skills of, you know, being how, you know, knowing how to argue and debate, and how that being transferable. I mean, I would say that's one of the core skills needed to work in analytics. You know, a few examples being, you know, being a consultant, how to convince your client that, you know, your solution is what they need, to move forward with a certain solution. If you know, work client side, you know, using the data to convince management above you about what you found. Because I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen where management makes a decision, the data shows something else, and they ignore the data. So being able to argue on behalf of the findings and going against what might be the corporate norm. And then the other piece that you were talking about there is going out and, you know, not taking advantage. That doesn't sound right, but
Using the opportunities that are around you,
that's
available around you.
yes, yeah, you using those opportunities and finding the opportunities that present themselves. That is also just a skill in and of itself. So it's not just the hard skills you learn from those opportunities that come up, it's looking for those opportunities.
Yeah.
Because the one thing, like, that's not going to happen in this space. Whether, if you look at analytics as a whole, you can split it into two areas. There's the technical instrumentation and the data connection, and then there's the usage of the data through reporting, analysis, insights, personalization. In neither of those two camps is the problem and the solution. Are they both going to jump out at you and say, here I am, right? If you're an analyst, which I am not, but if you're an analyst, there isn't going to be a button that you go in and press and say, oh, show me this specific thing. That's not going to happen. You have to go hunt and look for it yourself.
Yeah, and something you said really, really resonated with me. And I'm trying to think back to the word that the words that you use, but I think it was around the logic classes or the being able to think critically and reason things through. It's something that sidetracks way too many people. We get, and this isn't to say again that learning the technology, the specific technologies, isn't important. It is, but that often is a barrier for lots and lots of people. So again, if learning Adobe Analytics or getting big data sets and learning R, may be very difficult to approach for a lot of people. So they throw their hands up and say, I can't get real world experience doing that, so I can't get experience, so I can't do this. And I think that's a problem, because sure, that part is important, but there's so much more out there that is available to you, that you should be focusing on, that provides amazing value in this space and many others that we just don't see. This comes up a lot when people ask me, what business books or what analytics books have you read that have had the biggest impact on your career? And they're expecting me to say something about some book about, data analysis with Python, or, thinking about business fundamental. Like, when I answer that the books that have had the biggest impact on me from an analytics perspective are the Tao Te Ching and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And people are like, what? Well, I mean, those aren't analytics books. I'm like, yeah, they absolutely are. I'm like, those aren't business books. I'm like, yeah, they absolutely are. There's so much that we can learn about breaking down complex problems, thinking logically, taking something that's fundamentally very complex and making it simple, not to dumb it down, but take it and break it down into its component pieces so we can attack a problem in a reasonable way. That's what we do all day long, whether we're doing implementation or we're doing an analysis or we're setting up an optimization program. A lot of what we do is dealing with complex things that we're trying to make more reachable. We're dealing with things that we're trying to break down into understandable components and being able to clearly articulate and communicate those with people that may not have our background. Thinking logically about complex issues, using logic to break down challenges. Not once did I say Google Analytics. Not once did I say R. Again, I don't want to devalue having specific knowledge of software, but there's so much more that goes into being a good analyst and being a good implementer than just the underlying technology. And you absolutely can see it from a services perspective, when you're dealing with a consulting agency, those agencies that take a tool specific approach versus those agencies that take we're trying to resolve a problem or solve a problem approach.
Yep. What you just said, I was writing it down to make sure I didn't forget this. What you just said is the tool is not the solution. The tool is the tool. Whether you solve that through a custom dimension in Google Analytics, an EVAR in Adobe Analytics, in a way, I'm going to say it doesn't matter which one you use. the tool is not the solution. The solution is the thought process you went through to fully diagnose what the problem was and then come up with the best way to solve it with the tool or address it with the tool.
Sing it from the rooftops, man. Yeah. And that's the challenge. And from an analytics perspective, we see that all the time where we go into businesses and they say we can't get any value out of our analytics. And we look at their implementation and we're like, okay, well, it's very clear that whoever implemented this took a Google Analytics centric approach or took an Adobe Analytics centric approach to solving your problem, rather than saying, let's solve this problem from an analytics, from a data architecture perspective, and then align the tool to that. It's fundamentally different, and it completely changes the way that you address problems and the outcomes to those problems. And ultimately, it creates much more long-term sustainable value to think that way. And unfortunately, we see it all the time. And I'm sure our listeners can probably see it. Just look at the companies that we work in. How many solutions do we have in our MarTech stack? Let's start there. Let's think about the meetings that we're sitting in, and we say, you know what, we have a problem with our checkout flow. Well, if we buy this screen replay tool, it's going to solve our problem. If you're hearing things like that, you have this problem of being tool first, that we're going to buy a tool and it's going to solve the problem. Hell, we see this in the remote space. Buy this tool and it's going to solve all your remote work problems. No, the tools will help support the solutions, but unless you address the underlying causes and issues you're trying to solve for, the tools aren't going to magically solve that for you. But we've been taught by really slick sales and marketing in the MarTech space that it does. Unfortunately, it doesn't, or fortunately, it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think those that I see as those that I've worked with that throughout my career that have again, success is relative, but using the word success, those that are the most successful, those that are at the top of their game with this are the ones that, yes, they have the tool experience, they know the details of the tool, but they don't fill up on just tool knowledge. They know where to find more information if they need it. They have honed the skills on how to assess a situation, how to assess a problem, not jump immediately to instrumentation, and know how to argue on what the solution is, arguing for the solution that they determine.
Absolutely. And again, those are all skills that you can learn without the tool.
Yeah.
And I think that's really an important lesson to take away from this conversation is if you've convinced yourself that you can't break in because you don't have the experience with X and Y tools, you're missing out on really the most valuable things that you can be learning that have really nothing to do with the tools. And what's amazing about that is the tool becomes less and less important. And it doesn't matter what company you walk into, it doesn't matter what tools they have or what you may bring in. What value you can bring to that company isn't changing because it's not tied to the tool. It's tied to the way that you think about data, the way you break down complex problems. That doesn't matter what tool you have. Again, I don't want to undermine the value of specific tools, but the importance is not letting the tool drive the conversation, letting your logic and your vision drive the solution, and then picking a tool that best aligns with that. But most do it the other way around.
Yeah.
In fact, They do it the other way around so much that in some very, very big companies, they have whole departments and job titles that mimic the name of software solutions.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to me. I am there. I know people that their job title is Salesforce something, Adobe Analytics something. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, what happens if you guys change tools? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, right now you're using the word tool and solution interchangeably. You're using that, and that just goes to show how the word solution has, in my opinion, become diluted.
Yeah.
It's synonymous with the tool itself. Just you said it before, and to reiterate it, just implement this tool and the problem goes away. That's not always true.
In fact, it usually makes the problem worse when you take that approach.
Because now you've just added one more level of complexity on top of it, and now you're solving the problems that come with the tool itself and not necessarily the original problem.
Yeah,
it's this vicious cycle.
It really is, and it goes back to how we started this conversation with remote work. If we're going to deflect the conversation to being in the office or being remote, we're missing the opportunity to really address the real problems. And the same in this conversation. If we're deflecting the conversation to tool A versus tool B, we're missing out on a great opportunity to address the underlying needs that we're trying to solve for. And to kind of bring it full circle, talking about getting experience for someone that wants to break in this industry. Again, I think that this roadblock of the tool knowledge being what's holding you back is a barrier we shouldn't be putting in front of ourselves. Because while it may seem like the easy foot in the door, oh, I know, X, Y, and Z. I know Oracle. I know Salesforce. I know Google. Sure, that may be an easy foot in the door, but long term, having that as your entry and your approach, I think is going to do a lot of damage to your career. You're pigeonholing yourself into being a line operator. Like, I use this tool, rather than being a creative thinker and problem solver.
Yeah. Don't ever hitch your wagon to one tool, one system, one vendor.
That's good advice across the board. Yeah. I mean, it's great advice for a career. It's great advice for people building solutions as well. Think about how many businesses have built up building their solution on top of someone else's solution. And then that solution they built on top of changes the game, and now they're done. So it's a shaky foundation at best.
Yes. So I, as we start to wrap up, I'll leave with this one story, and I think I may have told it before, but I want to tell it again because I think it's apropos to this. So, like I mentioned earlier, when I was a senior in college, I was actually already working for a company part-time. And then eventually I was hired on full-time after I graduated. And like you were talking about earlier, like finding opportunities and just getting in there and finding the experience. Through a friend, I found out about this small company not too far from where I was living at the time, out here in suburban Philadelphia, and they started as a printing business, but they were making a pivot into software and building software tools for a particular industry. And they had offered someone I know a position. They just needed someone to work part-time doing like building out the tool and helping test it and whatnot. But they were actually moving away. They were transferring schools and they were leaving. So I'm like, all right, get me the name. I'll call the person. And I did. And it was just because they approached them with, well, we hear you know how to operate a computer. Now you got to think back. This is summer of 2001. So, for me, I kind of grew up on that cusp as computers were becoming ubiquitous. So you had a software division. The people know how to, obviously these were coders and programmers, but they were looking for someone. Like, this was still, like, believe it or not, God, it was 21 years ago. This was I'm going to dare say it. This is the day and age where it's like, oh, you know how to use a computer here, right? You know how to work around Office and Excel and these other things. And, that's how they approached it. So, I did. I literally called the guy up. I cold called him. I said, I know so-and-so. I know how to work a computer too. I'm very familiar with the Office suite. I'm familiar with this, familiar with that. It's like, all right, come on in for an interview. We shot the shit for 30 minutes. And next thing you know, I was working there 3 days a week, while I'm a senior in college. And it was really cool because I sat in this bullpen area with all these other developers. So, I would come in at, various times during the day. I'd come in between classes and work for a few hours and go back to school. And like, it was like how I kind of picked up various things and talk about like frameworks and how to organize things and do that. Sitting in this bullpen area with these folks, it was interesting. I look back fondly on those days.
Yeah, it's such great advice. Although hard advice to hear for us introverts, in that we often take a very passive approach in employment to getting what we want. It's, oh, I saw a job opening, I submitted a application, I sent in my resume, now I'll sit back and wait. The reality is that most of the jobs go to people that go out and get it. And again, as an introvert, that's hard to hear, because that makes us nervous and our hands sweat a bit. But making that call, reaching out, saying, this is what I want to make this happen, those are the people that are getting the jobs. And if you want to break into analytics, that's what it's going to take. Waiting for the perfect job opening or internship to pop up is probably not going to work out. Identifying a company or an opportunity and walking in the door and saying, here I am, let's do this. That's how it works. Not only just the first job, but the 10th job as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Great advice.
So fun little story to end on.
I like it.
Cool.
Good
well, this was fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up for now then, and catch everybody later.
See ya.